Just another tragedy. This is just another premeditated tragedy in a way, and this has nothing to do, or very little to do, with the people that were involved in this particular trip or the people that are the victims of this, but rather policies that ended up getting these people to resort to these means of. So on top of that, a gag order that was issued by the high courts of Greece in order to not have any leaks on the media about the ongoing investigation.
And boats, and nobody came to their rescue. People were actually watching this fishing boat drown and people die.
Years on the island of Lesbos, which was one of the frontline islands during the so-called refugee crisis, which of course people like Phevos in Greece refuse to call a crisis because they argue, as I have also written in print, it's a failure of will. But at the same time, the EU as a governing body has empowered Frontex since 2015, its security border force,
Right.
to do all kinds of things in the Mediterranean and on the borders of Europe, right? It has also been outsourcing migrant management to its semi-colonies in Africa. Right?
These are involved, if you pardon me saying this, in broad daylight murders. Because if they see people are dying and they don't rescue, that's violative of all international laws and the human rights.
National law. But at the same time, it's very important to say that the Greek government has tried to evade responsibility even for the death of its own people in its own soil, for something that could be totally foreseeable, and the collision of two trains on one single line.
Hello and welcome to New Wave Global. And today I am going to be talking about a very important and tragic incident that took place on the Mediterranean Sea near Greece. In fact, a ship that was carrying more than 650 asylum seekers, many of them are now dead. Very few survivors have been identified, and there were multiple nationalities on board, mostly from Pakistan, Egypt, and Syria. And why did the Greek Coast Guards did not help? Were they culpable in this tragedy? What are the laws and rules that govern migration, as well as the treatment of such trawlers and boats? We shall be talking about this. I'm very privileged and honored to have two very important guests with me. Phevos, who is an activist, and he has been working with the refugee communities. He is joining us. Let me also, try and say his last name properly. Phevos Simeonidis. And Professor Sadia Abbas, who's a professor of English at Rutgers University, US, but she's also the director of at the Center for European Studies, and has looked at migration and other European policies in the recent years. So I shall start with Phevos.
So thank you so much for having me. I mean, it's indeed a case that has many questions around it, but there is only one question that we have an answer for, and the question is that should we expect things like this to happen? Yes, we should expect things like this to happen, and this is just another tragedy. This is just another premeditated tragedy in a way, and this has nothing to do, or very little to do, with the people that were involved in this particular trip or the people that are the victims of this, but rather policies that ended up getting these people to resort to these means of getting themselves to Europe. In short, in order to explain to you what happened, as far as we know, because there is not only there is very limited information available to us as citizens, as researchers, or as journalists, but there is also, on top of that, a gag order that was issued by the high courts of Greece in order to not have any leaks on the media about the ongoing investigation. So as far as we know, a fishing vessel, which was totally inappropriate for such a trip and totally unseaworthy, as it also, based on the result of this trip, with more than 400. I mean, the lowest figure that we have is 400 to 500 people on board, and the highest figures, and as you say, this is still increasing, goes up to 800 people of various nationalities, men, women, and children, from different parts of the Middle East, different parts of North Africa, attempted to cross what we call the Ionian Sea, basically from Libya all the way up, trying to reach Italy, but unfortunately on the early hours of the 14th of June, the ship capsized, leaving only 104 survivors. The amount of bodies recovered is 81 or 80. There is still an ongoing search and rescue mission allegedly going on, and everyone else is considered officially missing, but should, at this stage and based on the depth of the sea at that point and the days that have passed, anybody else should be unfortunately presumed dead.
Yes.
So this is the, let's say, the long story short of what happened.
Yes, Phevos, thank you so much. And as you said, this is not something new, which is also a very important point to note, and it has to do with a lot of criticism has emerged about the culpability of Greek authorities and the coastal guards, that the survivors, what I have been reading and seeing their videos, have said that there was a helicopter around, there were other ships and boats, and nobody came to their rescue. People were actually watching this fishing boat drown and people die without relief. So I want you to make a quick comment on this particular aspect. How has it been reported in the Greek media? And then I go to Professor Sadia Abbas and make sense of the larger issues related to the migration to Europe. Yeah.
Even since the very first hours that we learned about the vessel being immobilized, we know, and that is officially confirmed by the Hellenic Coast Guard itself. Like, this is not a rumor, this is actual part, and this is also what the authorities are considering right now, investigating the case. That the Hellenic Coast Guard was aware, and the Hellenic authorities and the EU authorities also, and their Italian counterparts were aware of the presence of this vessel as early as the morning of the 13th of June. So that means that there is at least 12 to 14 hours that authorities were aware that there is a vessel without a flag, without any indicators, with people that seems to be a vessel in distress. And I don't know how many people actually, like how many vessels or other assets supported them, but we for sure know that there was no call to nearby ships to effectively assist on the search and rescue. We know that in a very nearby coastal town, and I'm going to quote the captain of that vessel himself, there was this rescue ship that was very well equipped. It's a private vessel. And he himself, the captain of that vessel, said on TV, live TV in Greece, that he was not asked to intervene. He was not asked to support, even though he's part of the official, let's say, connection between the Coast Guard and private companies that sometimes, lease these ships for these operations. At the same time, we also know that there were not a mobilization of forces in order to support the people timely. And by timely, I mean before the capsizing, because it is actually true that once such a vessel with such an amount of people on board capsizes, then there's very little you can do apart from picking people up from the sea. So I think this is something that initially was denied, and initially many spokespersons of the Coast Guard and other authorities in Greece tried to say that no, the boat was seaworthy, the boat was moving, they didn't ask for help. And then it seems right now that not only people did ask for help, but the authorities were also aware that the people were asking for help.
Thank you so much, Phevos. And, I would now go to Sadia Abbas. And Sadia, it would be really important for our viewers to sort of make sense of this tragedy within the larger context of European politics and European policy, particularly with respect to migrants and refugees. I mean, the World Refugee Day is approaching as well. And I read yesterday that the EU Commissioner for Human Rights she made a really strong statement about how the EU member states need to act and not just pay lip service to human rights. But, can you please elaborate and decode this particular tragedy in the context of larger European, situation?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me, and greetings from London. I apologize for the noise outside, but there are cars and I can't quite control it. But, this, as Phevos himself, with whom I've been in conversation since 2016, has taught me over the years. The national condition in Greece is very, very, very entwined with the European Union, right? And but it's also something that I've encountered in my own engagement with Greece since 2007. I have spent many, many years on the island of Lesbos, which was one of the frontline islands during the so-called refugee crisis, which of course people like Phevos in Greece refuse to call a crisis because they argue, as I have also written in print, it's a failure of will, right? But the question is, whose failure of will is it? Now, that the Greek government is culpable in this is, I think, incontrovertible, right? And that New Democracy, the Neo Democracy government, or Demokratia, I believe as it's called, is not a migrant or refugee-friendly government, right? We know that. It is not, the most right-wing government in Europe right now. That's not the case. And I think that's where some of the negotiations that have been going on within Europe have been very interesting, right? Because Poland says we don't want to be fined, and Hungary says it doesn't want to be fined, and then the EU gets to pretend that it's clean and honest, and then we hear from the European Commissioner of Human Rights, but what about the other European commissioners? I mean, because there are fissures within the EU, right? So the human rights now, or the people dealing with refugees and so on, might be somewhat friendlier, but at the same time, the EU as a governing body has empowered Frontex since 2015, its security border force,
Right.
to do all kinds of things in the Mediterranean and on the borders of Europe, right? It has also been outsourcing migrant management to its semi-colonies in Africa, right? Not unlike what the UK is now doing, trying to send, sort of deporting migrants here to Rwanda, right? So there is a kind of pushing deeper and deeper into Africa, right? So, which is a kind of interesting, if you think about a continuation of colonial habits. So we're going to extract from your parts of the world, and we'll take your goods, we'll take your capital, but keep your people and keep them down, right? So that's part of it. Now, okay, so there's a game of chicken that gets played between the authoritarian governments and the EU, right? So what we've got is a dance between the neoliberals and the authoritarians, right? The EU is neoliberal. You've got these more and more right-wing governments coming up in Europe, like, Hungary and Poland, but all of Europe is shifting rightward, right? The world is, but all of Europe certainly is, in lockstep with right-wing tendencies in the United States. Now, the point is, of course, that the game of chicken is the EU pretends periodically to be more migrant friendly, and then these authoritarian governments say, oh, it's so terrible, you're oppressing us and denying us our national culture. The Polish is saying you're going to punish us, but they all want to be part of the EU. So the question is, what do they want to be a part of, right? What they want to be part of is an institution that derives its power and wealth from a colonial history. People have written about this, that wealth, and they want a part of the wealth without any recognition of the responsibility. The EU isn't great on this. What they're doing with Frontex is very clear. We know that migration is going to go up. Yeah. We know that. And we know that one of the reasons it's going to go up is because of climate change, an issue that is very much a part of Pakistan's landscape right now, right? So what they're doing is, by ratcheting all of this up, is by empowering Frontex to do what it's doing on the borders, is in fact to sort of insulate themselves, right,
Mhm.
or I mean, to raise the the bridges, if you will, of fortress Europe, right, and to retreat into itself, to actually stave off further migration. The other question, of course, then becomes a global question of global structures in which even countries like Pakistan are complicit. Why are these people leaving, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
and that is going to be the next point. But I'm over to you, and then we'll see.
No,
Right?
thank you, Sadia. Thank you for this really interesting and profound sort of insight into the larger European politics and policy and their links, and sadly, to colonial attitudes. Phevos, I do want to ask you about the reaction and response within Greece, within the civil society, activists, political society, because I've seen people demonstrating on the streets, and statements from different politicians, of course, depending on where they are ideologically. But tell us, I mean, is there sufficient pressure emerging? Because it's not the first time Greek authorities are involved, if you pardon me saying this, in broad daylight murders. Because if they see people are dying and they don't rescue, that's violative of all international laws and the human rights covenants. So is there pressure mounting for the Greek authorities and Greek politicians to change these policies?
I mean, that is something that we are trying to do, each one, individually or in smaller collectives or in smaller groups of people. I myself have been working with a team of Omnia TV and Mada Masr, an independent media in Egypt, and we are trying to bring and shed some light into this, and so do many other very good colleagues, journalists, reporters, and investigative researchers. At the same time, also mainstream media are looking into this, and the profound debunking of the claims, of some of the claims of the Coast Guard by the Coast Guard itself, didn't really do the authorities any good, I have to say here, because even mainstream media had to point out certain inconsistencies in the narrative that was prevailing initially. When it comes to civil society, obviously there is a huge condemnation from all possible actors of the civil society space in Greece. We also see politicians and political actors from a variety of parties scrutinizing the government's response or non-response and inactivity. And there is also a larger debate right now happening in a way of currently we don't have an active on-duty government because we're actually pending elections this coming Sunday on the 25th of June. So that means that we are also in this interim space that allows, on the one hand, the previous, let's say, government, which seems to be the one that will be the next one, to evade some responsibility, but at the same time highlights the way that this government has been treating this for the past 4 years. I mean, it's also interesting, and I have to highlight it here, that very recently we had a huge accident that involved a huge train wreck, a collision of 2 trains, which concerned Greek citizens dying. And the reason I'm saying this is not because I think there is in the narrative that we promote a division between where someone comes from, whose country they are a national of, but at the same time it's very important to say that the Greek government has tried to evade responsibility even for the death of its own people in its own soil, for something that could be totally foreseeable. And the collision of 2 trains on one single line is something that should be foreseeable. In the same way, this having such an unseaworthy vessel coming all this way in these conditions and not offering help to that also has a foreseeable outcome. And if I may just add, the amazing thing about the Greek government, the Italian government, and many other governments across Europe and the EU as a whole, with or without Frontex, but even more with Frontex, is this amazing huge apparatus of visibility and monitoring that has been established, something that we are actually supporting with our own taxes and money, and through bilateral agreements and through funding from various sources. So this amazing apparatus of surveillance and monitoring turns a blind eye, literally, when something like this happens. So it's not only about evading responsibility about the inaction of someone, but is also at the same point trying to say that they didn't even have enough information to act upon something, when all the authorities have been doing for the past 4 years is to create this panopticon of sorts that turns out to be quite useless when it actually matters.
Right, right. Thank you. Saadia, I want to, because you were recently in Italy and you've spent a lot of time, I mean, you spend a lot of time in Greece, and you delve into European history, contemporary European issues and societies. I mean, where do you see all of this going? I mean, this level, I mean, we are seeing that Europe is, parts of Europe at least, are shifting rightwards. I mean, it's not too different from the US either, where you have these xenophobic, anti-migrant, anti-asylum seeker, anti-foreigner kind of positions by politicians, even in the popular media, and the sort of profiling and dehumanization of the other. And I think I want to place this ship tragedy in that particular context, because each year we've been reading about these incidents, in Italy or in Greece or in Australia. I mean, I'm shifting geographies, but it's a common occurrence. I mean, Australia had built these like animal-like cages. I mean, I saw a few documentaries and read about that, and I was appalled. So in the European context, I mean, tell us, I mean, do you see any chance of this changing or shifting in the coming years, or is it going to become far worse before anything changes?
I think it's going to get worse. I mean, I'm blanking on the name of what is it, of the Australian island? Is it Manus Island? What is it?
Something
Sorry.
like that. Yeah, something like that.
Because
yeah.
what is it? Manus, right? So I mean, and as you know, we ourselves at Ideas and Futures put up a documentary comparing the Australian situation and connecting it to the Greek one. But I mean, look, one thing is that, I mean, and people have argued, Greek activists have argued, that some of these catastrophes are actually meant to work as deterrents, as are the appalling conditions in these islands and that at one point they wanted to turn Lesbos into Manus Island. People have argued this, right? And it has been suggested to me. It's fully racialized. We just have to accept that. And it's also fully Islamophobic. I've been in Greece when I've heard tell of, these migrants coming in, and they're like, oh my God, we're going to be invaded by the Muslims. We're going to be, and on the other hand, there's also this kind of, fear of racial replacement, right? We know that in Italy, African migrants have been badly attacked, right? But what we also know is, right, that again, some of us have argued that the EU needs to accept its own colonial history, because unless it actually addresses it, right, these so-called sort of waves of migration make no sense, right? These people are coming here, and now I speak sitting in England, which is no longer part of Europe, but at least or something. But it's its own floating continent, a mini continent. But in fact, look, I mean, these people are here because we Europeans, right, were there, and Americans still are there, right? Yeah. It's not some kind of sort of random fact, right? It's a connected fact. I mean, when people started coming from Syria and Afghanistan, right? Yeah. It's because there was in Syria and Afghanistan. Syria is a more complex case, but when they were coming from Iraq, it was because NATO and the United States were in Iraq, right? I mean, you can't destabilize entire regions and expect people to just sit there, right, waiting to be pulverized. That's one thing. The second thing is the issue of economic, right? So, and let's not the Pakistani issue, right? I have been coming, you're right, to Lesbos since 2007. I'm now spending a lot of time in Italy. As you know, I just organized a conference in Italy, a 3-university conference called The Idea and Futures of Europe, in which we had a large migration and border component. we're trying to reckon both with the history of where all of this comes from, but also what the potentialities for the future are, and whether they're right. Now, at the moment, when on the migration issue, they are bleak. They're terrible, right? And they're terrible. And as you, as Phevos points out, it's not just Frontex, right? It's a whole network of apparatus. It's your entire the very structure of bureaucracy within the European Union, right, is geared towards surveillance and, let's actually be clear, deterrence, right? Now, the whole language of refugee versus migrant is an interesting one, right? And Pakistanis, we have to be very clear about this, have been on the lowest part of the totem pole, right? In Greece as well. And you know, and I mean, Phevos has said to me at one point, and we can confirm this if he wants, that, you know, the Pakistanis are down there with the Roma in Greece.
Yes.
Right. I've been meeting Pakistanis in Greece since 2007, right? In Italy, and again, you know that I'm working on this now. Small towns in Italy have huge numbers of Pakistanis. Like, I walk around speaking Urdu in Siena, right? I mean, this is huge, right? And but our general emphasis, at least in South Asia, is on the Anglo-American connection, right? We have not, until recently, paid any attention to the fact that we have huge migration to Europe, right?
Yeah.
The bemusement, the attempted bemusement, befuddlement with which people in Pakistan and the government are reacting to this recent tragedy is also scandalous. We know that since Mr. Bhutto opened the passport offices back in the 70s because he promised roti, kapda, and makan, and knew that there was no way that anybody was going to get kapda and makan, given our economic situation, and it was a lot better back then, was to encourage people to leave, right? So, and people do leave. So you will find, I mean, I've spoken to more people from Gujranwala and Gujarat in Siena than I ever have in Karachi.
Wow.
I mean, that's a fact, right? And now from the frontier as well, right? So, and this was just in the past 2 years. When I went in 2011 for the first time, there was nobody there. So, I mean, that's one element, right? The second element is the structural element, which is a global structural economic / climate change, but it is economic and capitalist element, right?
Yes.
Which is that there is profound immiseration around the world and in Pakistan. We know this, right? The economy is a disaster. The same forces that hammered Greece in the debt crisis, the European Central Bank, the IMF, the World Bank, at least two of them are hammering us now, right? The IMF and the World Bank, right? So Pakistan is going through this as well. How it's being shafted by the IMF, that's true. On the other hand, like Greece, it's also got its own internal elites who have done nothing to redistribute.
Yeah.
Right? Towards redistribution in Pakistan, right? So how people are supposed to live is entirely unclear. So we jump from one catastrophe to the next.
Yeah.
Climate change, floods, cyclones, IMF, right? But the fact of the matter is, what are people meant to do in a country in which we have done nothing to control population, have destroyed education, right, systematically, and where the economy is a mess, but it's also a mess thanks to our own policies.
Of course,
right?
Saadia,
So,
I fully agree with you. Yeah.
Right. So it's a question of what the West has done to us historically, what we are doing to ourselves now and historically, and what the IMF is doing to us now. And then what has been done to the planet, which is leading to the climate catastrophe, right? Which will create more migration. It has to. So then the question becomes, what is the Pakistani government doing? And what are Pakistanis doing to think through the coming crisis in any way that is not simply, a kind of discourse of catastrophe, but is actually trying to address structural issues in a systematic way, right? That we are racialized in Europe is a given.
Yeah.
Right? We know that, right? That there's Islamophobia in America and Europe is also a given. All of that is true, right? That Europe's policies are racist? Yes, that's also a given, Europe's policies are racist, right? We know that. They don't want the brown people to come and overrun them because they are afraid that we might do to them what they did to us. I understand that, right? But at the same time, all of that is true. What are we going to do within Pakistan? And even now, the response is a bit disappointing, right? Because all people want to talk about is the smugglers. And I think few of us will have more to say about this, as if there's no structural issue here.
No,
right?
no, there's, of course, yes.
Or they want to blame people for going and letting their kids go. And what are they supposed to do? And I'm going to say something you don't do. Logon ke paas khane ko nahi hai is waqt. Right?
Exactly.
I mean, people don't have enough to have anything to eat right now. What are people supposed to do? And the young men I have met, and the young women I have met in Europe, in Greece, in Italy, from lower middle class and working class backgrounds in Pakistan are lovely. Not all of them, but many are. Right? They don't want to be there.
Yeah, of course. Of course. And Saadia, may I add that, I think we'll, of course, take this up in our subsequent conversations on this particular issue. What you mentioned about the structures, the kind of economic and social conditions that compel younger people to leave their countries in such hazardous conditions. But the human trafficking networks, which are global and regional and local in Pakistan, are also an issue that, so at least, there's a silver lining that now that is under immense spotlight within Pakistan. And because a lot of these people, there are these, smuggling networks in Libya, in Egypt, in Pakistan, and international ones. So I guess we'll also delve into that, but I totally take your point. That's not the primary issue. These are all.
People will have something to say about, I think, the smugglers.
Yeah, please, Phevos, why don't you say that and we conclude our conversation tonight? Yeah.
No, I always found fascinating ever since I started researching and also being on the front line in Greece back in the day in Lesbos. There is, first of all, I have to say for the record, at least, from my side, the smuggling versus trafficking is a huge debate right here, because we are not speaking about trafficking, we're speaking about smuggling, at least when it comes to people actually wanting to reach a destination. And the reason I'm making this division is because I'm neither a pro any of the two in necessarily, I'm neither involved in any of them, but what I find very interesting is the fact of people want to use smugglers to move to a certain place. And this creates the issue that this problem will never be resolved and these networks will never cease operating, and such journeys, such perilous journeys will never stop happening unless there is safe passage to Europe and to other places. So it's not really a question of how do we control smuggling or how do we control mobility. There's no way that you control mobility, you can only regulate it, because mobility will happen. And that's something that, throughout the eons, throughout the ages, ever since humans are working on this earth, as far as we know, there is mobility. So, and I'm not saying that in terms of looking at the glorious past, but in terms of like what is happening right now. The very reason that this shipwreck happened is because through means and ways that I won't go into the deep right now, but like through means and ways, Egypt, for example, is not a place that boats can start from, and that has been regulated. And what people did, they went and started their journeys from Libya. Similar to that, Greece is implementing a pushback policy in the Aegean Sea. That means people are trying now to get away from Turkey in non-seaworthy boats and travel south of Crete. For anyone that knows the geography of the area, that's absurd. It's absurd to go and take a boat from Turkey, go all the way in international water south of Crete and try to reach Italy. Like, that's absurd with a type of vessel. So the reason I'm saying this is that it's proven once more, and it will be proven again in the future, unfortunately, through very sad events, that you cannot regulate irregular, as they call it, migration. You can only facilitate safe passage. And if you allow people a fair way and a safe way, most than anything, because if you don't allow people a safe way, then they will find an unsafe way to move. And that's simply something that they will do, and that will not stop. So this is what I just wanted to add to.
No, that's a really great point. And thank you so much, Phevos. And thank you, Saadia, for being here. And I think we have to delve deeper into some of the issues that we've talked about, and hopefully we'll continue this conversation and this series because I think it is something that needs to be discussed and engaged with. Thanks and goodbye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.